and that collective action is what is needed to ensure the safety of our futures moving forward. Komortada.
Thank you so very much, Kathy, for also reminding us on the value of culture and maintaining culture through our collective efforts to find solutions to the climate emergency. Esteemed colleagues, if I may now take the opportunity to just briefly walk through some of the key components of the Pacific Dialogue communique that were discussed and negotiated and agreed to by senior officials throughout the past 2 days. But before I do that, let me just bring us back to some words that kept repeating themselves throughout our discussions in the last 2 days, particularly on the issue of relating to the new IPCC report that came out. So, the thought was the new 2050 now has moved up to 2030. In all elements of the need for urgency, I think many of the Pacific countries that participated understood the urgency of the climate emergency that we are currently facing throughout the world, whether they be through Hurricane Ida or bushfires across the world, or cyclones here in the Pacific, or prolonged droughts or sea level rise. It is now upon us. And therefore, I think many of the components of the communique have expressed the positions that the Pacific countries wanted to put initial priorities on leading up to the COP26 in Glasgow. The dialogue is the third series of CVF regional dialogues being convened by the forum to identify an up-to-date understanding of the types of challenges and successes that we face in the region, particularly the most vulnerable developing nations. Yesterday, the meeting of experts started to process finalizing the CVF regional communique, outlining regional perspectives on the climate action, and the dialogue highlighted the devastating impacts of climate change as historically caused in the Pacific and the significant damages to vulnerable populations. The meeting highlighted how climate action is mutually beneficial in different economies and explored areas of convergence between the respective groups. Among the areas of convergence identified were the following. First, delivery of the $100 billion, provision of the annual commitment of developed country parties to mobilize $100 billion on climate financing annually to developing country is critical to enable action and sustaining trust in this international process. And the second is the greater ambition from major emitters. The social, environmental, and economic security of the Pacific requires safeguarding the 1.5 degrees Celsius in the Paris Agreement goal to limiting global warming. Even 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, poses catastrophic risk for the region. The third one was the imperative of new financing. And according to the Global Commission on Adaptation, financing needs for adaptation and resilience are 1.7 trillion per year, as at least developed small islands and vulnerable middle incomes face these emergencies. And the fourth one is the loss and damage. In addition to the need for financing of loss and damage, COP26 needs to place a higher level of prioritization on loss and damage in the work of the Warsaw International Mechanism. And the fifth one, the finalization of a robust climate market consistent with 1.5 degrees Celsius to unlock new financing and finance work streams, while the carbon market regime should raise 5% proceeds to support the adaptation action of developing countries, particularly those most vulnerable to climate change. The sixth one is on adaptation. The call for real action in the form of removal of barriers to technology transfers and investment in capacity development. The seventh one was a new input from the Pacific on the need to also recognize the role that international sectors need to play to reduce their emissions, particularly the international sectors such as IMO and ICAO and others needing to decarbonize by at least 2050. The eighth one was on the Maritime Zone, the securing our maritime zones against the threat of climate change related sea level and preserving our existing rights and entitlements stemming from our maritime zones. The 9.1 is the oceans. As Pacific states, we believe that oceans was also a critical component by reaffirming our commitment to sustainably manage, use, and conserve our Blue Pacific Ocean within and beyond national jurisdiction. The next one was no new coal. We strongly support the call on call from the United Nations Secretary General for an end in international financing and subsidization of coal plants and shift financing into investment in renewable energy. The next one is worker protection and jobs, calling upon partners to consider the need for urgent capacity, finance, technology, and technical assistance to help protect workers in the Pacific region. Next one is the displacement and migration, calling for increased support to the Pacific region to help most vulnerable communities to increase their resilience to disasters and slow onset erosions due to climate change. And the next one, the number 13, is the human rights, by calling on the United Nations Human Rights Council to expedite the mandate for the Special Rapporteur on climate change and implication to human rights. Number 14, and the last one, was parliaments. The need to encourage the active engagement of parliamentarians of the Pacific in the CVF Parliamentary Forum to benefit from exchange of legislative good practices for effective national and locally led efforts on climate change. Your Excellencies, emphasizing the importance of mobilizing resources and investment assigned to specifically adaptation and loss and damages, and of securing robust economic development, as well as safeguarding swift regional progress towards fulfillment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, we welcome the new program of prosperity plans launched by Bangladesh CVF presidency. Your Excellency, without further ado, I would like to hand over the moderation to His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Honorable Minister Caston Namara. Minister Namara, the floor is yours, sir, and I thank you and I wish you all a successful deliberation. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Ambassador Albani Soda. Honorable Co-Chairs, Excellencies, fellow ministers, distinguished participants, and ladies and gentlemen. Yakoi, greetings and welcome to the Ministerial Roundtable of the Climate Vulnerable Forum Pacific Regional Dialogue 2021. My name is Caston Namara, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Marshall Islands, joining you from Majuro, capital of the Republic of the Marshall Islands. And I wish to begin this segment by extending warmest greetings and express our deep appreciation to each and every one of distinguished participants and fellow ministers of member countries of the CVF, as well as observing countries, plus distinguished representatives of the partner organization participating in this dialogue, co-organized by the government of Bangladesh in its capacity as the chair the Climate Vulnerable Forum, together with the Republic of the Marshall Islands as a TRILCA member. The publication of the IPCC sixth assessment report last month was a stern reminder that the need for strong and coordinated action on climate change is more pressing than ever. In this context, the goal of this CVF Pacific Regional Dialogue was to articulate climate change policies, priorities for the vulnerable developing countries in the region. By bringing together colleagues from the Pacific, this dialogue has also served as a platform to share our country's experiences in dealing with the climate crisis. This exchange amplifies the inputs of the Pacific to the climate policy discussion. It also fosters a more complete understanding of the challenges, successes, needs, and gaps that the most vulnerable developing nations in the region are facing when they tackle the climate crisis, particularly in the troubled context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our countries have a meaningful and central contribution to make these crucial topics. With that, let us proceed with our session today. We will first hear from the honorable ministers of the member countries of the CVF, and then proceed with statements from honorable ministers and representative of observing countries. And later, we will have statements from CVF partners as well. And at this time, I'm privileged to pass the floor to Honorable Dr. Mahendra Reddy, Minister for Agriculture, Waterways, and Environment, who will be participating through a pre-recorded video. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Bulo Vinaka and very good evening to you all. Thank you for the opportunity to join you at this year's Climate Vulnerable Forum. First, allow me to acknowledge work done by Climate Vulnerable Forum in amplifying voices of the Pacific Island countries, highlighting our key perspectives and priorities. Small island developing states are already adversely affected by the increased intensity and frequency of our natural disasters, loss of productive farmland from saltwater intrusion, relocation of communities near coastal regions, and substantial financial drain for mitigation and rehabilitation efforts. Fiji has pledged to achieve economy-wide net zero emissions by 2050, and this commitment will soon be legislated through a climate change bill. Our National Adaptation Plan maps out a multi-billion-dollar effort to strengthen our climate resilience, and Fiji is committed to plant 30 million trees and sustainably manage every square kilometer of our ocean by 2030. This action will spearhead Fiji's ambition to becoming a carbon-negative society in the not-too-distant future. A large number of communities are settled along the coastlines. They settle there because they derive their source of livelihood from sea and coastal resources. However, the very source of their livelihood are now threatening their existence due to the sea level rise and destruction of coastline. For some, there is no alternative, but they have to be relocated. Government has identified at least 43 communities that need to be relocated to higher ground due to worsening climate impacts, of which 6 have already been relocated. The government established Ministry of Waterways, especially to protect those vulnerable communities. The ministry has begun protecting these vulnerable communities along rivers and coastal areas via nature-based solutions. The nature-based bank protection or seawalls are cheap, establishes a new ecosystem for livelihood support, and are sustainable. Fiji had also developed and launched its planned relocation guidelines at COP24 in Poland in 2018. The plan allows affected communities a powerful voice in where, when, and how they are relocated, and ensure that they have a clear income-generating opportunities post-relocation. Furthermore, we have also launched a climate relocation trust fund as part of our concerted national effort to avert loss and damage and protect the most vulnerable Fijians from impacts of climate change. The fund will also go to research, vulnerability assessments, land scoping exercises, and the hard cost of relocating and supporting people in infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, as we head to COP26, we must work to ensure that our strong and effective collaboration on our climate-threatened nation cannot be forged and serve to promote more robust, equitable, and responsive action by the international community, as well as enhanced finance technology support for our own climate nation efforts to overcome our climate change-related challenges. Thank you, and Vinaka Wakalebu.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Dr. Rady of Fiji, for your remarks. I would now like to pass the floor to the Honorable Minister Bruce Lincoln, Minister of Climate Change and Adaptation from Vanuatu, who will also be participating through pre-record video. The floor is yours.
His Excellency Mr. A.K. Abdul Momen, Minister for Foreign Affairs, People's Republic of Bangladesh. His Excellency Mr. Kasten Nemra, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and the Republic of Marshall Islands. His Excellency Mr. Albon Isora, Ambassador of the Republic of the Marshall Islands to Fiji and the Pacific Islands. Mr. Shamim Al-Razi, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of Bangladesh, and CVF designated national focal point. Fellow leaders, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good day, good afternoon to you all. It's my distinct honor to be part of the Climate Vulnerable Forum Pacific Regional Dialogue 2021, which aims at identifying and promoting important climate change policy priorities for vulnerable developing countries of the region. Excellencies and colleague leaders, climate change is a single global threat with several cross-sectoral impacts experienced and observed, which affect mostly small island states, including Vanuatu and neighbor countries. Vanuatu was ranked the most vulnerable nation on Earth according to the World Risk Report. A single cyclone caused economic loss and damage effects of USD 449.4 million, which is 64.1% of GDP. And annually, Vanuatu experienced an average of 2.5 cyclones. As you know, this is made difficult by the impacts of COVID-19 and our existing vulnerability to natural disaster and the recent Category 5 tropical cyclone Harold that struck Vanuatu during the COVID-19 border close down nearly demonstrate this. Just like our small islands developing state, climate change remains our biggest challenge with the continuing rising global temperatures, and we are continuing to face frequent natural disasters and sea level rise. Drought are increasing, and that the ocean acidification will continue to accelerate. The threat of climate change makes it difficult to attain our sustainable development goal, and our extreme vulnerability means that our reliance on the multilateral system will continue to heighten. Excellencies and colleagues leaders, the triple challenges of climate change impact, the global pandemic and the need for emission reductions give rise to the needs for more dialogue and collaboration with key government and private sectors to mainstream climate change into their policies, strategies, budgets, and plans. The global climate action discussion of mobilizing USD 100 billion per year by 2020 to address the needs of developing nations like Vanuatu is yet to be realized. Extreme climate change challenge and impacts intensify national status of vulnerabilities, which triggers the need for resources to be made available for vulnerable countries like Vanuatu to effectively implement national climate change and priorities, and so reducing risk at the national level. Excellencies, fellow leaders, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Lincoln of Vanuatu, for your remark. I would now like to pass the floor to Excellency Venturi Elisa Sai, Samoa High Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Esteemed Chair, Honorable Ministers, distinguished representatives of our development partners, Pacific members, observer countries, and our partner organizations. Samoa is privileged to be part of our Forum's Pacific Regional Dialogue this week. We want to place on record our appreciation to the governments of Bangladesh and the Republic of the Marshall Islands for successfully co-hosting this timely event. The culmination of our dialogue will be the formal adoption and launch later today of our 2021 Pacific Regional Communique. Our communique is a comprehensive and ambitious but a well-balanced articulation of the totality of our challenges, opportunities, and solutions to build our resilience to address our vulnerabilities against climate change. With COP26 only a few weeks away, the timing of today's launch of our communique could not have been perfect. It allows us to give a Pacific flavor and identity to the collective Climate Vulnerable Forum advocacy for the Glasgow Climate Conference. Dear colleagues, because this is a family Talanoa and we are talking to the converted, singing from the same song sheet in terms of our challenges, vulnerabilities, and actionable solutions, I will only mention that in 2020, Samoa launched its climate change policy, its ocean strategy, its 2040 strategic roadmap, and for 2021, it has submitted in July its second nationally determined contributions to the UNFCCC Secretariat and its third Universal Periodic Review report to the Human Rights Council. While we would have preferred to have a face-to-face dialogue, current COVID-19 realities decided otherwise. While this is unfortunate, on deeper reflection, perhaps the question to ask is whether there is a lesson or positive takeaway in the way the world is approaching the COVID-19 that can help shape and mold our global approach to address climate change. What do I mean? Well, like climate change, health pandemics know and respect no boundaries. We are all the same regardless of our military might, economic status, physical sizes, our religions, cultures, or traditions. The main difference and the simple truth is that with COVID-19, the whole world, developed and developing, are affected in a very big way, not just vulnerable states, LDCs, or Pacific Seas. My point is, when something impacts you personally, your loved ones, your people, your country, your health, your life, and even your wealth, governments and people, including the private sector, they will drop everything and anything and respond immediately and decisively. Why? Because their lives are at stake, and it's a matter of life and death. With the benefit of hindsight, the silver lining in the pandemic, if one could term them as such, includes the swift, globally coordinated response to find a cure to the virus, the outreach to ensure everyone will benefit, inclusive of countries without the means to get the vaccines and health support. It also unleashed a revolution in medicine to find a cure, technological innovation to respond to the new reality as we are benefiting today through these virtual means. But I think more reassuringly, it reminded all of us that the world is one interconnected global family that should be firmly grounded in humanity and solidarity and should share and care for each other. Regrettably, for climate change, because it is not impacting all countries now and in a uniform manner, the reaction of some member states are casual, unconvincing, couldn't care less, and not uniform, with some always finding excuses why they cannot be ambitious with their climate change actions now. So going forward, maybe that should be a focus of our new CVF narrative and advocacy with all our partners. How can we convince the rest of the world to treat climate change like COVID-19? After all, climate change waits for no man. And if we can apply the same decisiveness and same principles of a global united approach to tackle climate change, that will benefit not just your country and your people, but the whole world, the less well-resourced and the truly vulnerable ones like our forum members. Maybe, just maybe, we could make a difference, and maybe that will put a stop to this finger pointing and apportioning of blame game so that it will soon be a thing of the past. In closing, always remember, this was the same message I shared in COP25. What goes around comes around. It could be the Pacific seats turn now. It could be the Climate Vulnerable Forum members turn now. But as sure as the sun rises in the east and sets in the south, in the west, your turn will come sooner rather than later. Fa'afetaitele, and thank you for the opportunity to share these comments. Fa'afetai.
Thank you very much, His Excellency High Commissioner Elisaya of Samoa, for your remarks. To continue with our agenda, we will now proceed to give the floor to our observer countries. And I have the pleasure to give the floor now to Her Excellency Ilana Sid, Palau Ambassador to the United Nations. Madam Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, you are muted.
Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, Senior Representatives, members and observer nations of the Climate Vulnerable Forum from the Pacific, Ali, and greetings from the Republic of Palau. I'd like to thank the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, A.K. Abdul Momen, and Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Mr. Kasten and Nemra, for inviting Palau to this very important event. We look forward to a continued fruitful and lively dialogue and hopefully collective action against the devastating effects of climate change. Brothers and sisters and friends of the Pacific, on behalf of the Republic of Palau, we'd like to pledge our support to 2021 CVF Pacific Regional Communique, which highlights 16 priorities for COP26. We stand here as one of the states that's most vulnerable to climate change, as we're facing the challenges of diminishing shorelines, disruption to our food security, extreme weather events like the recent Typhoon Sergei that inflicted substantial damage in our country, and continuing and sustained damage to our ocean and reef system, which our economies are built and our cultural heritage relies. As such, we support all 16 priorities. However, we'd like to highlight 5 that are of most significance to us. On the topic of mitigation, we fully support the priority of no new coal. Palau does not currently have and has no future plans to utilize coal-fired plants, as they are one of the most polluting conventional energy sources. In that light, we feel that coal usage is inconsistent with the Paris Agreement's goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. On the issue of finance, we would like to highlight that the $100 billion annual budget disbursement has never been reached. We'd like to advocate for the fulfillment of that objective to be a priority, and also revisit the overall distribution of finance support between mitigation and adaptation. We'd further like to highlight that of the 20% support provided on adaptation, only 2% of that support went to SIDS, which in our minds presents an inequitable distribution of money to countries that are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Further, of that 2%, at least half of those funds were not in the form of grants, but in the form of loans, further burdening these already vulnerable countries. Therefore, we support that financial support should not only be increased, but also be dispersed as grants and not loans. With respect to the key issue of markets, we advocate to finalize robust carbon markets and the creation and maintenance of a uniform rule book that ensures integrity in getting us to our goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. As a vulnerable SIDS country, we truly feel that we cannot solve the existential threat of climate change without a coordinated and comprehensive multilateral approach. On maritime zones, we recognize our past, present, and future development are based on rights and entitlements guaranteed under the 1982 UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, that maritime boundaries are preserved in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. And finally, on the issue of oceans, we affirm our commitment to sustainably manage and conserve our Blue Pacific Ocean to ensure its health, productivity, resilience, and safety, as we've demonstrated by the establishment of the Palau National Marine Sanctuary. In the context of COP26, we urge all parties to ensure that the work on Ocean Climate Nexus is advanced at the UNFCCC, recognizing its centrality to our community as the Blue Pacific continent. As you may be aware, Palau has announced that we will be hosting our Ocean Conference in February 2022. We would like to invite you all to join us and work together to ensure it thrives. Thank you, Romal Masulang.
Thank you, Her Excellency Seat of Palau, for your remarks. And I wish to clarify that Palau is actually a member of CVF. And my sincere apology, Madam Ambassador Seat, for this error. To continue with our agenda, we would now give the floor to partners. And I have the pleasure to give the floor to Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum, the Honorable Henry Puna. The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. To the chair of this Pacific Regional Dialogue, the Honorable Carsten Nemra, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and his representative to the forum, our moderator for this dialogue session, His Excellency Albon Ishoda, His Excellency Abdul Kalam Azad, Special Envoy for the Climate Vulnerable Forum, the Honorable Mahendra Reddy, Minister for the Environment of Fiji, the Honorable Bruce Lincoln, Minister for Climate Change and Adaptation of Vanuatu, Excellencies and representatives of member and observer states, representative of our development partners, Professor Patrick Verkuyen, Chief Executive Officer, Global Center on Adaptation and CVF Managing Partner, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address you today as you deliberate on the climate change crisis recognized by Pacific Forum leaders and by all Pacific Islanders as the single greatest threat facing our Blue Pacific region. There is no doubt that climate change is an existential threat for many Pacific Island countries and affects the core elements of Pacific people's well-being and livelihood. As a former pearl farmer for nearly 20 years on one of the most remote atolls in the Cook Islands, the island of Manihiki, I have gained more than a decade of lived experience of the turbulent reality and impacts of climate change. Indeed, there are many similar personal experiences from the countries that are represented today in this dialogue. Climate change is real. It is happening. And my firm belief is that true and meaningful climate action can only be achieved if we all play our part, if we all work together, and if we engage in all sectors and international platforms available to us. At this juncture, let me congratulate the governments of the Republic of the Marshall Islands and Bangladesh and the Climate Vulnerable Forum for your leadership in convening this very important Pacific regional dialogue. It comes at an unprecedented time, not only that our members are struggling to cope, reeling from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on our health infrastructure and economies, but more so, the latest findings of the IPCC Working Group 1 report, which confirms that the climate change crisis is much more serious than we thought and more pressing and urgent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, what we see around the world today is that the most vulnerable countries to climate change are not just the ones at the forefront of the brunt impacts, but are also the ones at the forefront of ambitious, decisive climate leadership. But this must be matched by action by the wealthy and major global emitters. Commitments alone are not sufficient. We need action now. We have seen renewed global focus and progress on climate change action over the past months. Yet, we must not lose sight of the fact that the world is still glaringly off track from achieving the 1.5-degree goal required to safeguard the survival of our Pacific Island communities. On the current trajectory, our coral reefs would be decimated. Many of our low-lying atoll islands would be uninhabitable within our lifetime. This is not the future we want for our children. And this scenario makes a decisive decade so vital. 2 days ago, in my discussions with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he emphasized that the UN will be counting on SIDS and the Pacific to put pressure on the big emitting countries for urgent climate action in the lead up to and at COP26. This is in recognition that to date, we have not seen enough urgent and ambitious nationally determined contributions and net zero commitments, particularly from the large emitters. There is also little progress on new climate finance commitments, including increased allocation for adaptation. I am so pleased to note that these key priorities are included in the draft outcome of this regional dialogue. Aligned to our regional commitment on climate change, Pacific Islands Forum leaders last month issued a collective call for COP26 to deliver the required ambition, resourcing, actions, and pathway towards a net zero carbon by 2050 and 1.5-degree future that will safeguard our children and our grandchildren. While I am on the subject of safeguarding the future of our children and grandchildren, I wanted to share with this forum another milestone development for the region that yet again cements the truth in the notion that as a forum family, we can rise to new heights as a strong collective where the future of our Pacific peoples is at stake. At their retreat on August 6, 2021, Forum leaders endorsed a declaration on preserving maritime zones in the face of climate-related sea level rise. This is indeed a turning point, a significant development fundamental to our collective effort to influence international discourse and responses to the issue of climate change-related sea level rise. For us here in the Pacific, we intend to take this fight forward, taking advantage of every possible avenue and means available to us. But that legacy moment for our Blue Pacific will only matter if world leaders urgently commit to decisive climate action that limits global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Advancing the work on oceans within the UNFCCC at COP26 is crucial, recognizing its centrality to the Blue Pacific. It is incumbent upon all of us, therefore, to roll up our sleeves and put our shoulders to the proverbial wheel together. In closing, Excellencies, for us in the Pacific, climate change is not a debate. It is not a fiction or a theoretical subject. It is real, it is happening, and it is a matter of survival. And every day of inaction brings us one step closer to a perilous and uncertain future, which could see many of our homes disappear. But we will not relent. We will not give up. We will do all that is possible to fight for our Blue Pacific and for the future of the one planet we all share together and call our home. All the very best in your dialogue, and I thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General Puna, for your remarks. I now give the floor to the representative of the Platform for Disaster Displacement, Professor Walter Kylan, envoy of the chair of the Platform for Disaster Displacement. The floor is yours.
Chairperson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the chair of the Platform on Disaster Displacement, the government of Fiji, let me thank you for the invitation to take the floor in my capacity as regional advisor of the Platform on Disaster Displacement in the Pacific. At the outset, I'm happy to deliver this statement on behalf of Professor Walter Kalin, envoy of the chair of PDD. The PDD is a state-led initiative focusing on the implementation of the Nansen Initiative agenda for the protection of cross-border displaced persons in the context of disasters and climate change. We work towards better protection for people displaced in the context of disasters and climate change, as well as more effective prevention of such displacement. We are proud to be a partner of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. We are pleased to engage with CVF countries, particularly today, at the Regional Dialogue of the Pacific. We are happy to see Fiji, a member of our steering group and current chair of the PDD, participating in this important event. We hope that our engagement and partnerships in the Pacific on activities to improve knowledge on climate change-related displacement, the sharing of effective practices, and developing effective policy responses will draw attention to the need for bold action on disaster displacement. We all know that the impacts of climate change, including displacement, are already occurring. Displacement in the context of climate change is happening in all regions of the world, and in particular in the Pacific. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, in 2022 alone, Fiji experienced 37,000 new displacements due to disasters, while Vanuatu experienced 80,000, all of which occurred in the context of extreme weather events exacerbated by climate change. The IPCC points to the risk for small island developing states of rising sea levels and the increased intensity of tropical weather events such as cyclones, which combine to create a higher probability of extreme sea level events and inundation of island settlements, all if we don't take ambitious climate action. These huge challenges can only be effectively addressed if we use all available policy tools to prevent and address displacement in the context of the adverse effects of climate change. We need action on reducing greenhouse gas emissions to mitigate the impacts of climate change in order to reduce displacement risk. We need to strengthen our efforts to help people stay where possible and help them to move when necessary or desired. This means scaling up adaptation and disaster risk reduction measures and ensuring that displacement risks and human mobility challenges are included in adaptation planning. And thirdly, we need to improve efforts to address the protection and assistance needs of persons, whether displaced within their countries or across borders, and find durable solutions for them when climate change related displacement cannot be avoided and amounts to loss and damage. Ahead of COP26, through these regional dialogues, it is timely to launch another joint call for robust and ambitious climate action. Addressing displacement in the context of climate change will require the incorporation of displacement risk assessments and preparedness into climate change adaptation planning and policies, as well as the Santiago Network on loss and damage. It also requires ambitious climate finance to catalyze action and support for countries and communities who are most vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, cutting across mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. And finally, it is crucial to systematically and explicitly integrate and mainstream displacement considerations in all aspects of climate action. We stand ready to support you in our efforts. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for your remarks. I now give the floor to the Director of the ILO Country Office, Mr. Martin Karunli. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, Excellencies, Ministers, distinguished participants, dear friends. I thank the governments of Bangladesh and the Marshall Islands, the members of the Climate Vulnerable Forum for inviting the International Labour Organization to this very important and timely dialogue. The frequency and intensity of natural events such as hurricanes, flooding, and heat waves across the world are a striking reminder of the reality and urgency to tackle climate change. The latest intergovernmental report on climate change on the physical science basis is loud and clear. Climate change is an existential threat with the far-reaching ramifications for the prospects of sustainable development. Countries in the Pacific are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. I want to highlight that climate change presents significant challenges for the world of work. Unabated, its impacts on the economy, people, and society could roll back important gains achieved in advancing decent work, social justice, and poverty reduction. Such economic damage is likely to reinforce the already existing decent work deficits, high rates of working poverty, informal and vulnerable employment, and lack of social protection. This is why ILO tripartite constituents have come to the realization that for the organization to achieve its mandate to advance social justice, it must imperatively integrate an environmental dimension to the decent work agenda. Therefore, addressing the climate change and decent work challenges is an integrated manner, is a fundamental relevance. Since 2016, ILO has worked closely with the Climate Vulnerable Forum to better assess the impacts of climate change and define jointly adequate policy responses. In this regard, in 2019, ILO published a report, Working on a Warmer Planet, the effect of heat stress on productivity and decent work. This pioneering research would not have been possible without the leadership of the CVF, which placed the question of heat stress and its impact in the workplace on the policy agenda. While recognizing the immense challenges of climate change, there is an absolute necessity to set out narrative right. Taking bold economic, social, and environmental policies to face climate change will yield gains for employment, incomes, and resilience. Studies by the ILO indicate that achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreement on climate change in the energy sector could deliver an additional 18 million net jobs by 2030, with Asia and the Pacific receiving the largest amount of new employment. In order to achieve all this potential, we must deploy the full range of climate, labor, and economic policies in a coherent, coordinated, and impactful manner. This is why the tripartite constituents of ILO have formulated a sort of guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. These guidelines provide a comprehensive framework to address the linkages between decent work and climate change in ways that maximize socioeconomic gains and minimize the risk. In March this year, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on all countries to embrace the ILO's guidelines for a just transition and adopt them as minimum standard to ensure progress on decent work for all. I'm pleased to inform that ILO currently implements development projects specifically addressing climate change and the transition to green economy in several CVF member countries. ILO, a number of partners within and outside the UN system, have initiated Climate Action for Jobs initiative as one of the initiatives resulting from the 2019 Climate Action Summit. The Climate Action for Jobs is designed to help countries find solutions that tackle the twin and defining challenges of climate change and decent work. And I'm pleased to mention that Minister of Commerce, Industry and Labor of Public Enterprises of Samoa is a member of and the co-chair of the International Advisory Board of the Climate Action for Jobs. We very much look forward to deepening our collaboration, including through the Climate Prosperity Strategic Investment Plans for CVF members to promote economic and job growth while building climate resilience. We look forward to working with you in a continued partnership to address climate change. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Director Karimli, for your remarks. I now give the floor to the last remark to Arena Representative, Mr. Kurbis Kono, Director of Country Engagement Partnership, who will be joining through a pre-recorded video. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to make a statement on behalf of IRENA to the Ministerial segment of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, Pacific Regional Dialogue. At the outset, I would like to thank the Presidency Bangladesh and the host of this regional dialogue, the Republic of Marshall Islands, for the kind invitation extended to IRENA. Aligned with the global agendas for sustainable development and climate action, countries are already going through a transition towards clean energy systems. Here, let me refer to IRENA's recently released flagship publication, The World Energy Transitions Outlook, which shows how the energy systems must change to align with the 1.5-degree climate objective through decarbonization, relying on renewable energy, rural and off-grid electrification, energy efficiency solutions, along with green hydrogen. I invite you to have a glimpse at the Outlook's technology, policy, and investment elements to strengthen renewable energy deployment in the Pacific region. The Pacific faces continued challenges related to climate change, environment, land access, high dependence on fossil fuels. Accessing to finance and investments in renewable energy has also posed a constraint to achieve the national energy and climate targets. With significant renewable energy potential and rapidly decreasing renewable energy costs, the Pacific region have a vast opportunity to address energy security challenges while at the same time strengthening resilience against the impact of climate change. The Pacific region rapidly expanded renewable energy markets since 2014. The total installed renewable energy capacity in the region reached almost 1 gigawatt. Many countries in the region have already surpassed 90% of electricity access rate. Nevertheless, still a lot remains to be done. In this context, the SITS Lighthouses initiative is coordinated by IRENA, and it provides global partnership platform to facilitate SITS energy transition. We have 36 SITS partners in the Lighthouses initiative, 15 of them from Pacific region. And on top of that, there are 32 development partners are present in the initiative. Through this framework, IRENA and partners are closely working with SITS, including many CVF members, providing the tools, platforms, knowledge, and technical support that will help them realize renewable energy ambitions. Most recently, our focus has been the enhancement and implementation of energy component of nationally determined contributions, NDCs. In this effort, we have engaged with 70 countries across the globe, including 7 Pacific countries, of which 4 of them are CVF members. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome the strong commitment by CVF to achieve 100% renewables and the interest to collaborate with IRENA to achieve this target. We hope to soon start working together with CVF to ensure stronger renewable energy ambitions integrated in the national climate prosperity plans, which may then be reflected in the NDCs and even long-term strategies. We are also interested in collaborating with CVF in creating an energy compact towards accelerating the implementation of 100% renewable energy target of CVF countries. The compact could provide good visibility to CVF efforts and can result in several partnerships which CVF and IRENA members should be able to leverage in achieving this ambition. These efforts will also complement the SITS Lighthouses Compact with an aspirational goal of 10 gigawatt of renewable capacity installed in SITS by 2030. We believe that today's regional dialogue and ministerial segment will further this energy transition ambition and enable CVF countries to strengthen international cooperation towards net zero emissions driven by renewables and enhanced climate action. I wish you all very fruitful discussions and look forward to a result-oriented cooperation between CVF and IRENA in support of meeting CVF energy transition ambitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kono, Director of Country Engagement Partnership. Fellow ministers, excellencies, distinguished partners, and I'll take this opportunity and express appreciation for all your excellent remarks. And we have come to conclude this session of member countries and partners in expressing their views and statements. And may I kindly ask we now proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is the adoption and launching of the CVF Pacific Regional Communique. And prior to conclusion. So, excellencies, the CVF Pacific Regional Dialogue, as noted, started 2 days ago, the 1st of September. In these past days, the meeting of experts commenced the process of finalizing a CVF regional communique, outlining regional perspectives on climate action to build momentum and awareness around the CVF agenda in the region and beyond, and shared agreement on future climate change policy priorities. The dialogue built towards a global senior official meeting of the CVF to be hosted by Bangladesh this October of 2021, which itself will collectively review the findings of all the regional dialogues and finalize a Dhaka Glasgow Declaration of the CVF to be adopted at the CVF high-level meeting that will be held at the UNFCCC COP26 at Glasgow in November of this year. These past few days, we've been having permanent contact with different delegations to successfully finalize this communique, 2021 CVF Pacific Regional. And at this time, I now present the regional communique and seek your valuable and very favorable consideration. And if there are no further inputs and consideration regarding the text, I sure will be glad to declare the regional communique adopted as one of the main outcomes of this important CVF Pacific Regional Dialogue. Excellencies, distinguished partners, I wish to thank you once more. As there are no more comments, I hereby declare the CVF Pacific Communique hereby adopted. And with that, I wish to also take this opportunity and thank everyone for your active participation in the past few days and today. Thank you very much for your support and inputs. It's very crucial for the outcome of the communique we just recently adopted. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to a special envoy, Azad, for his closing remarks. Special envoy Azad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Excellency Minister Kasten Namera. You have very successfully conducted this session, and I congratulate the participants for adopting the regional communique. I strongly believe that your recommendations, you have added some recommendations with the draft. That is very excellent. You identified the regional issues and incorporated that. I believe in the coming months, especially in October, we'll be discussing this in the senior officials meeting and take it forward for the Glasgow Declaration, Dhaka Glasgow Declaration in November 2021. I pay my sincere thanks, Excellency Namera, for co-hosting this event with Bangladesh. It's our great pleasure, and always we know that CVF is run by Troika leadership. There is the present presidency, past presidency, and future presidency. Maybe very soon we'll be having the future presidency for 2022 to 24. Then obviously we will have new Troika member. I congratulate the COP presidency for joining this event, encouraging us to join this COP26 with our agendas. Also, I pay my sincere thanks to the dear participants, CVF countries and the observer countries. Also, our organizations, those who are supporting the cause of CVF and vulnerability. I want to share two information at this point of time. Very recently, UNICEF published one report. That is the Children's Climate Risk Index. This shows 50% of the global children, that is about 1.1 billion, they are under climate risk in different form. And another piece of information, if global warming continues by 2 degrees pre-industrial level, that may reduce 20% of our food production. So mostly affecting the developing countries, small island countries. And also this will increase disease, different types of pests, and evolve different new species like this COVID-19. So these dangers we have. A new innovation are being practiced globally in some of the countries, especially developed countries they are doing. that is the no-till farming. They are putting the seed under the ground without tilling it. Yes, risks are there that whether this will germinate properly, yield will be proper. But the research shows that it is giving almost equal result. So we need to look into that the tilling the soil increases or total emission is about 25 to 30%. That is the global carbon emission. So if we can introduce the no tilling, along with these, obviously, the no coal or 100% renewable energy, which the CVF has their agenda. With these, I congratulate that you have adopted the communique with your observations. And together, obviously, we are strong. Individually, maybe small countries, small island countries, we are nothing in terms of contribution, in terms of achievement. But when these 48 countries, and I believe within a very short time, a few other countries will be joining with us. So together, we are very strong. The advocacy, which GCM Chief Executive Officer mentioned, that the outcome of Paris Agreement, we have the role, these CVF countries. And if we talk in one voice with our Dhaka Glasgow Declaration, I believe the voice which we are raising about 500 billion in next 5 years. The developed country, they had the lip service so much, but actual delivery were not even near the 100 billion. So this time from CVF presidency, we raised this voice that you need to come up with the comprehensive work plan, comprehensive plan, how you are contributing this 500 billion in next 5 years. And plan this so that most of the funds, not in terms of loan, or whether grant can be much more increased. At the same time, we are raising the issues of loss and damage, and also the issue so that 1.5 degree NDC. In last December, unfortunately, we observed that no major or significant declaration in NDC as we expected. We all see in the report of IPCC, their 6th report, they are telling that the global warming and all other devastation will be coming forward by 20 years, which were supposed to happen in 2050. That will be happening in 2030. So we need to come also the commitment of the developed country, what they were supposed to do by 2050, they need to do it by 2030. So much more aggressive planning is required. Last year, COP did not happen, but damages to the nature, loss and damage did not stop. So with these information, we need to go to the COP26, raising our voice. I believe the recommendations which you have today, we'll be discussing this in October in our senior officials meeting. And I will raise another issue which you have discussed already, that is the climate prosperity plan. In Bangladesh, we have the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, naming after our father of the nation. So CVF office, they prepared a template for all the vulnerable countries. Looking into that, Bangladesh adopted Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. Obviously, our natural condition, our vulnerability will not equally correct for you. So looking into your vulnerability, looking into your prospects, we need to turn this vulnerability into prosperity. We used to mention, our Prime Minister used to tell that the cyclone Bola of 1970, it cost 500,000 lives. But cyclone Amphan last year of same magnitude could take only a few dozen. A single life loss is it's a very priceless damage. But the vulnerability which we had with this resilience, country like Bangladesh, a very small country having 1,250 persons per square kilometer. So we could reduce this vulnerability, so became a resilient country. Now we thought that from resilience to prosperity, we need to live with nature. We need to combat we need to face the climate challenges. The vulnerable countries, we used to share our good practices. At the same time, we raise our voice at the global level to have 1.5 degree, to have 500 billion. Together, obviously, we can achieve. Participants from observer countries, we humbly request you, please raise your voice. Let us be together to have a louder voice in the global arena. This very regional dialogue, regional meeting, regional discussion will pave the way for better climate outcome in COP26. Thank you very much for joining this event and hearing me. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Special Envoy Assad of Bangladesh, for your inspiring and closing remarks. I now take this opportunity and Excellencies, fellow honorable ministers, distinguished partners, we have now come to the end of our CVF Pacific Regional Dialogue. It has been truly my honor and privilege to participate in this important dialogue. We value your inputs, support, and commitment. As was highlighted before with a number of our fellow speakers, that we will need to work harder in collective voice on the issue of climate change. So with those few words, may God bless you, your families, your respective countries, and the organization you represent. I hereby call the dialogue concluded. Thank you and stay safe.
More.
Thank you, all excellencies.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you.